pattern syndrome. So I think we're all there now, which is good. Oh, it's one of those things about doing webinars. There's always some kind of backstage goings on. So I've just been doing a little backstage goings on, and I always lose my mouse when I'm doing webinars, which isn't much fun, because then the seamlessness of the slides and the recording and everything else, and the questions which I'm looking forward to you asking, yeah, they kind of, yeah, you end up seeing a little bit more of my screen than perhaps I'd want you to, which makes it sound like I'm about to expose my knickers, but I promise that that is not going to be happening on this particular webinar. Future webinars, depending on how broke I become. Anyway, moving on very swiftly. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Just to start off with some this is how it's going to work housekeeping. So I've got I wanted to call them extinguished guests, but they're not on fire. I have a couple of distinguished guests that I'm going to be introducing you to in a second, but we're very interested in you. Why are you on this call? What do you want to find out about publishing? What's your publishing dreams? Oh, have you written your book? Is it done yet? Are you halfway through? You're kind of through? Have you written a book before? And have you decided that perhaps now is the time to consider self-publishing, or now is the time to go from self-publishing to publishing? Or is it still just on the back of a cigarette box? All of those little ideas that you've got running around in your head. So we really want to hear from you. So in the questions box, if you kind of scan down your list of options, if you could type the questions, that would be awesome. Because what we've discovered in previous webinars is that when you try and tell us something, we have this kind of, you talk to me? Is that my mic? Is that my mic? Oh no, is it? No, it's not me. Oh, and it can be a bit of a problem. So if you can type us your questions, and what we're going to do is we're going to answer as many of those as we possibly can as we go through this call. So you have experts here. Yes, I was always told X is something that has been, and spurt is a drip under pressure. However, we have publishing experts on the line, two incredible ladies who I just think are amazing, including myself. I'm also amazing. But we're going to start by introducing you to somebody who has published my non-fiction, well, my fiction book, my first fiction book. I decided to self-publish, having had publishers in the past. I thought, let's just see how this goes. So I'm going to introduce you to a fabulous lady. She's at Silverwood Books, and her name is Helen Hart. And look, I made a special slide for her. Hello, Helen. Welcome to the webinar. How are you doing?
Hi, Becky. I'm fine, thank you.
Cool. So do you want to tell everybody all about your brilliant work?
Okay, I will. Silverwood Books is a company that I started about 8 years ago. We had our 8th birthday in March, and I came from a writing background, and a lot of my friends were starting to think about self-publishing because publishing was changing the way it was working, and people were finding it a bit more difficult to get that dream mainstream publishing deal. But the companies that they were using were producing books that were very poor quality, very amateurish, and no bookshops were prepared to stock their book. So I thought there's a different way to do this, and the way to do that is to ensure that there is a high quality book at the end of the process, a book that's properly edited, designed, and goes through all the processes that it would do if you had been commissioned by Penguin or Faber, but actually you, the author, are driving that yourself, and you're hiring me and my small but expert team to create that fantastic book for you and make sure that the project goes as smoothly as possible and that you avoid any expensive pitfalls, and believe me, there are lots because it's a very steep learning curve. And so that's Silverwood in a very long nutshell.
And it's a lovely nutshell, if you don't mind me saying. And I certainly was one of those people that when I decided to self-publish, I looked at various options and various things, and for me, I just rolled over and wanted to die. And so I found it quite frustrating. Which we will talk about some of those as well on the call. Some of the options that you have as an author who wants to get their book out into the world. So we'll come to that in a moment about the various ways in which you can actually make that happen to yourself. But without any further ado, I would like to also introduce you to Jack Burns. Now, Jack is one of these people who, whenever you talk to somebody in the publishing industry and you ask for advice, they seem to always tell me to go and speak to you. So Jack, how are you doing?
That's nice. That's very nice.
They do,
But
because
can I
everybody
just
in the
say
industry just,
before
yeah, everyone
before we
using
move
to the
on,
point of all knowledge.
lately Helen's name keeps coming up all the time. Silverwood books keep coming up, so it's really interesting and lovely to be on the call with her tonight and with you, Becky, because as you know, you and I have come across each other in so many different ways as well. I think publishing is just like that, isn't it? That we're now finding ways to market that suit us best, whereas before we were constrained. And I suppose really that's why it came to pass that Kirsty McLaughlin, another agent, and I set up London Writers Club because we just saw there were so many sort of missed opportunities, and a lot of what goes on in publishing is a lot of sort of criticism that literary agents are gatekeepers. And going back to what Helen said about quality of books, there are good reasons for that, for wanting to gatekeep that. In that we produce good books. However, what we were seeing as agents is that we were saying no every day to really fabulous ideas, and so we set up London Writers Club so we could say, okay, authors, okay, agents, here you are in the same room. Go talk to each other, meet each other, have an opportunity to pitch, hear directly from agents why they gatekeep in the way they do. So yeah, and with my editorial background, I'm really interested in great content, well executed, well edited, and there are a lot of really good ideas out there that aren't so well executed, and then sometimes there are a lot of okay ideas that are written very well, but what they're missing, I suppose, is the really exciting sort of conceptual aspect to them that makes them saleable, whether that's to trade publish or self-publish. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, really. And I blurted this all out in a book last year, which made me laugh because it nearly killed me. I'd written books before under a pseudonym, etc., but I hadn't ever written about writing, and the circular aspect of that just gave me bald patches where I was up at 5 a.m. thinking, what else is there to say about writing? Everybody said everything that needs to be said. Anyway, the book's now published in print with Hodder, and I'm very happy about that. So that's me. Thank you for inviting me, Becky.
Very welcome. And it's one thing that I always say, yes, somebody may have said it before, but have they put it in the way that you can put it? Because the way that you can put it means that different audiences will be able to respond to it in different ways. So I know that one. Yes, because I've stumbled down that one myself. So let me introduce me, because I've just had the arrogant assumption that everyone knows who I am, which is of course nonsense. So I'm an author, a speaker, radio presenter, all-round lovely person, or at least I try to be. My writing journey started by reading self-help books. Now, that is kind of perhaps sounds like nothing, but I didn't really learn to read until I was in my 20s. I mean, properly read. So I was dyslexic. Well, I still am, but not as much, interestingly. I was in the special needs group at school, and I really, really struggled with the English language, and I especially struggled with maths. And I really honestly was told, you don't really have two brain cells to rub together and cause a fire. So for me to have gone from there to having published now what is 5 books is an extraordinary achievement, really, and one that I brush under the carpet and I don't even realise, because it was such a love and a joy to do. It didn't really feel like anything, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but I have to say, if I was probably the last person on earth and shoved onto a desert island and no one was around to read anything that I wrote, I would still have to write. Because writing is a process of self-discovery. It's not just something that you do in order to have your work read. And what inspired me about reading it was always a boyfriend. So it was a boyfriend that introduced me to self-help books, which probably explains what he thought of me. No wonder we broke up. You need to read this. You're messed up. So I love that feeling where you've read something and then you just have to take a moment, and it might be that you take your glasses off, or you put the book down for a second, or you reread that paragraph over and over again, because something inside of you has shifted. Now, I didn't just get that from self-help books. I also got that from Anne Rice reading vampire books. And I read every single vampire book all of anything that she could kind of like, right, I got completely obsessed with her. And I think all of this comes down to the basic desire for humanity is sex. So what I mean by that, because that just sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? Is that feeling that you get where you go, oh yes, oh yes, oh my God, yes, that's it, that's the thing. And when you get that opportunity when you're reading a book, that's amazing. But I tell you, when you have authored a book and somebody writes to you and says, thank you so much for what you said in your book, even my book Cupcakes and Coffee, which is under the name of Rebecca Stone, and it's a fun erotic fiction book that's meant to be funny and it's meant to take the mickey out of itself. But people were having really big breakthroughs because it's about a woman going on a journey of self-discovery, trying to find self-love. So no matter what it is that you're writing, we're about to talk about publishing, and the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying is because throughout this webinar, I don't want you to lose sight, because we're going to start talking nuts and bolts and steel and, stuff that perhaps isn't as juicy as the desire to connect with another human being and create something powerful. So I wanted to say all of that just because I want you to have that in the back of your mind so you don't forget why you're on this journey. Because when you start to look at publishing, it can feel a little overwhelming, it can feel a bit scary, and you can draw the conclusion, what's the freaking point? So I tell you what the point is. The point is that email. The point is that reader. The point is when you have grown yourself from having authored a book and made an impact and done something different in the world. So the three of us are really all passionate about that, all of us. Jack starting up London's Writers Club, Helen started up Silverwood for the same ambitions. All of us have got this in common, which is that we want to help you have that idea sex, being rude again, have that connection with other people, because it doesn't matter how many voices there are in the world. It's how your voice connects with people and what you've got to say that could change the entire planet. No pressure, it's okay. No pressure. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. So if you've got any questions about publishing, even kind of like, what do I do personally with this particular thing that I've got going on at the moment, then do write your questions in the question box. So there's a couple of options as far as I understand. Well, there's quite a few options when it comes to publishing. There's the traditional route, which more so now than ever, if you are a non-fiction writer, it seems to be that you need to have some kind of platform. And what we mean by platform is that you have a certain amount of followers on Facebook, that you have a certain amount of audience via your newsletter. In my case, my first book could be published because I was lucky enough to have my own radio show. So because I had a radio show, I had an audience. So then therefore a traditional publisher could see the merit that I would be able to sell a certain amount of books because I already had an audience. With fiction books, that doesn't seem to be quite the same case, although important, but not necessarily the same. But don't let that stop you if you haven't got an audience, because another way of building an audience is obviously to self-publish a book. And there's a couple of options with that as well. You can go down the do-it-yourself route, which is you get someone to be able to typeset the book. You need to host it up on Amazon. You need to obviously have an editor. I just do not put anything out there into the world without an editor, whatever you do. And even when you've got an editor, make sure it's been edited again. It's like there's nothing worse than. In fact, I'm just going to tell you where this fear-based thinking comes from. One of my books that did have an editor was still returned to me in the post after publishing with red pen all over it. And right at the back of the book, they wrote, "See me." Quite humiliating, quite awful. Things do slip through, no matter how tight your net is, things do slip through, but editors are extremely important. So you can do it yourself. You can go through that route. You can learn all of those things that you need to learn, which is a bit of a steep learning curve. Or you can hire a company like Silverwood. I suddenly feel like I'm on the BBC. Other companies are available. But Helen, can you talk to us a little bit about the pitfalls that people fall into with self-publishing before we start talking about traditional publishing, because that might be the way that most people kind of are going down. So tell us a bit about the problems and the solutions around the idea of self-publishing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I quite like to pick up on the editing that you mentioned. Um, I'm not sure if you can hear it. I'm getting quite an echo of hearing my own voice in the
Ah,
back.
okay.
Is,
Well, I shall turn you down, and if I don't know if no, because Jack's got headphones on, so I will turn you down a little bit because that might be my fault. So I apologise if it is. Yeah, you were kind of
okay.
coming in a
I've
little.
got an echo as well.
Ah, okay. So try again, and we'll see how you sound.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on the editing that you mentioned. Because that's certainly one of the first things that we notice when self-publishing authors come to us. They often say, either I don't need an editor because my cousin is an English teacher and she's read my book, my manuscript, or they say, no, it's been edited. And then when we look at it, we think, really? And I think there's quite a common misunderstanding among a lot of writers that an editor is not always an editor. There are several different types of editor. So we often have to go back and check with authors and say, okay, what kind of editor did you use? The first sort of editor that a person would want to engage with is a developmental or structural editor. That's somebody that will go over your manuscript and look at it in a bigger picture sense. So they're not looking at the punctuation, they're not looking at the sentence structure, they are simply looking at does the story arc work? Is the plotting coherent? Do all the loose ends get tied up at the end? I mean, obviously this is for fiction. For non-fiction, they're looking at the structure and the logical flow of information, and is that information being communicated to the reader properly? So very much big picture. Then you might work with a line editor or a copy editor. There's somebody that is actually looking at the next sized picture down. So they're not so much looking at the big picture, although they might have half an eye on that if they notice something very inconsistent or disjointed. But they're looking at the flow of your sentences, and is this a beautifully written sentence, and is there a possibility for perhaps rephrasing this or looking out for this repetition? And then you go down another level, and as you go towards publication, you're then going to use a proofreader, and a proofreader is somebody that is focusing on the absolute minutiae. So they're looking at the dotting all the i's, crossing all the t's, making sure that the punctuation is correct, that there is consistency. So all your dialogue either has double quotation marks or single quotation marks, that your headings are all consistent, and your subheadings, and that there's a good hierarchy to that, and there's not an inconsistency. So that's the first thing, that we're always looking at a manuscript, and that can sometimes take writers aback because they think, well, I've paid hundreds of pounds for this, but it's not the right type of editing. So that's one really important lesson that every writer needs to learn, is the flow of the editing process and getting the right editor. And unfortunately, anyone can set themselves up as an editor or proofreader and say, this is what I do. And I would say that you always need to check them out very carefully and look at the Society for Editors and Proofreaders, who are an organisation that maintain high standards in editing. And the other thing is chemistry as well. Chemistry is very important between you and the editor and the copy editor. Less so with the proofreader, because they're looking at so punctuation is either right or wrong, whereas the editor and the copy editor need to really get you and understand your book and where you're coming from. And some people try a couple of editors before they find a really good fit. So that's and that, I'm going to stop talking about editing now, because I feel like I've done that one to death. Another area where self-publishing authors can potentially go wrong is rushing to get a cover design when their manuscript is not ready for publication. And a cover, I would say, it's immensely important, because most of us, believe it or not, make up our mind about whether we're going to buy a book within about 8 seconds of seeing the cover. And the cover is important because it has to work as a thumbnail online, as well as an actual size on a print book, and it also needs to work in black and white in e-readers that may not all be in colour. So cover design is very important to get right. We sometimes have authors that come to us and say, oh, I want to publish my book, I've had my cover done already. And well, you don't even know what size your book is going to be or what the dimensions are going to be. So how can the cover be done already? We need to take you back a step or two. And that's disappointing because they may have spent several £100s again getting a cover done by a professional cover designer, but it's either not market appropriate or it's not going to actually physically fit the book that they're going to end up with. So I would recommend doing lots of research and finding out where you are in your sort of publishing, what we often call the publishing journey, and is it appropriate for you to be rushing off and getting a cover now, or do we need to get the nuts and bolts sorted out first and get a pathway from raw manuscript to final printed book?
Perfect.
Does the cover come in that?
Very good. I know we've got a couple of sound problems because you're now not feeding back, which is great, but Yvette has lost sound completely. So I'm hoping, Yvette, that you've got your sound back. So if anyone else is struggling with things, then do let me know. But I think we're all right now. Brilliant. Thank you for that, Helen. That's amazing. We've got a message in via email from Elaine, and Elaine was saying, and I'm going to pitch this to both of you, but I'll start with Jack, which is what, in your opinion, is the best way to get your book published, with a publisher or self-published, and what's the cost of them both?
It completely depends on the topic and how commercial it is and how strong a concept it is. So what might be good, actually, if she quickly types and lets us know. She's live here?
Yeah, she's on the call, but do you know, I actually know, so I can answer this myself. So it's a memoir that she's creating. So it's about the story of her life, and it's very good. She's read me some bits, and I love it. So it's about her life, and it's quite a historical piece as well. Not calling her old. She'll laugh at me for that. But you know, it's got some really beautiful story about situations that have happened in her own life.
Okay, well, firstly, so let's take trade publishing first, because often that's the way around that people tackle getting a deal. In order to get a memoir trade published, it needs a particular hook. So, for instance, there needs to be fresh light on an old subject. So if it's a subject that's been covered before, or it's a period of time that's of interest to people, then her book needs to contribute something new to that story. And with a memoir, you do need to create a platform in the same way as you do as other non-fiction. So you would start having conversations around that before you approached a publisher. Kirsty, my partner in London Writers Club, sold a fantastic book to Penguin about George in London, and she spotted that woman from a really fascinating blog. She hadn't been doing the blog that long. She's a historian, so she had the credentials, but she got this incredible book deal because she just saw that, you know, she had this fresh angle on Georgian times. So I would go through an exercise of perhaps develop some questions. How new is my book? Of what interest is it to people? You know, are there enough sort of famous people in there, or am I uncovering a new period of history that people are already know there's an audience for, that people are fascinated about? So if you think of something like it's fiction, but it's a good example. Think of somebody like Philippa Gregory, who writes about Tudor England. She covers an area that we all know about. I mean, we all did Henry VIII at school, etc., in the Tudor court. But she fills in the gaps. So she writes history as if it's sort of semi-fiction. So, well, she does add her own take. So she will fill in gaps of what's known. So particularly of background people. So people who were at court, but who were perhaps more in the background. She talks about them. So that was her fresh angle, and those books sell like absolute hotcakes. If the other thing is, you know, why you're writing it. If you're writing it just to get it off your chest, because it's a book that you would really want to write and that you want to share with friends and family, and perhaps sell some other copies, then perhaps just self-publishing. If it's a cathartic exercise, if it's just about getting the book done, then I would say self-publishing is the option. I'm writing a memoir of my family. We migrated to Australia in the 60s, about 60 of us, and we were all bonkers, Scousers. And I keep changing my mind about what to do with that, and to date, it's still a personal project, but I can see now that I can bring a slightly different spin onto that memoir that could make it commercial. So, and by that I mean, I could think of a topic that's quite relevant at the moment, which is about migration and about why people refuse to assimilate or refuse to give up their past. You know, they're moved to a new country and they don't want to learn the language, they don't want to do those things. And my family was that family, and I suddenly realised that there's a bigger story beyond just my experience. So that's absolutely essential if you want to get to trade publisher. If you can't get any of those things I've just mentioned, then self-publishing is definitely the route. The other thing is, if you don't want to have anyone else involved in the project, if you want to choose the cover yourself, if you want to have the book absolutely as you want it, then that's another reason for choosing self-publishing, because your agent will edit the book, your publisher will edit the book, and they have final say on how the book is marketed and what the title of the book is as well.
Yeah, and they're very powerful things. And I think there's actually a lot of merit actually in self-publishing a book that is for your family. That is, an incredible kind of piece to be handed down. Like, it's better than an old sideboard that someone will sell when they're broke and they need rent money. It's just what an amazing family heirloom as well. I think that's quite a beautiful thing. Anything that you wanted to add to that, Helen, before I move on?
No, I think I completely agree with Jack there, and I would say that the key word, unfortunately, is commercial. And whenever I'm doing talks with authors, I always say that writing and publishing is quite difficult. And as I'm a writer too, so I know how difficult it is. That particularly publishing is where creativity and talent meets the commercial world, and that's quite an awkward juxtaposition, because when you've created something and it's your story, you think, well, surely everybody wants to read this. But the sad and unfortunate truth is that for most publishers, they're looking at the bottom line. They're always thinking of the commercial aspects and thinking, can we at least break even on this? Because most publishers are going to be investing probably tens of thousands of pounds in the production of the book, the marketing of the book. So they need to be absolutely assured that the sales are going to be there to justify that investment. And that's really why self-publishing is often a better angle if you don't have the profile to be able to guarantee those sales. Most surprising people do have profile, and I would say that perhaps you should always at least approach a literary agent or a publisher and try that route first, because you don't know. And if you have got, Jack says, good and interesting new spin on something, or something that's very topical, and you're the right person to have written that book, then yes, a mainstream publisher may well invest in you. But nowadays, you can publish something that even if you're only going to sell or even give away 5 copies, 10 copies, you can use a lot of different services to make sure that what you are leaving behind with your family is a legacy that is still fantastic on a bookshelf in 50 years' time. And that's, I don't want to get on my little hobby horse of print books versus ebooks, but I would say that is, if you're going to do a memoir, you probably do need a really beautiful print copy, because it does need to last the test of time and be on your family's bookshelves for generations, hopefully. Whereas if it's just an ebook, you never know what's going to happen with technology and whether that book will still be available in the format in which you invented it in 15 years' time.
So we touched there a little bit on platform, which leads us nicely into a question from James. And James has said that his question is really about building a platform and a tribe, and building squeeze pages and marketing the upsale and all of that kind of thing. So I'm going to answer that a little bit as an author who's having to peddle. There's a lot of peddling going on here. So in my experience, you're really looking at building a tribe in your newsletter. That seems to be the most important way of having an outreach to people, because if there's a particular message that you've got and that book that you're writing is backing up your message. So a lot of businesses perhaps will create a book to show a level of expertise, and I've certainly realised that having a book is probably better than having a PhD in terms of saying, putting your mark down as being an expert in something. So if you're already caveating it as being an expert in a particular field, so thinking about J.R. Hartlin is fly fishing. So if you were a fly fishing trainer and you were writing a book on fly fishing, and you were, if there was other things that you are selling off the back of being a published author, that's really helpful. So you've got your book, which credits you as having the expertise, and then there may be also the one-to-one coaching that you do on the side of that, maybe being a guest speaker on another side of that. So the book becomes part of an entire business. It becomes your calling card, in a way, quite an expensive calling card, but it becomes a calling card to say, yes, I am an expert in this particular field. So if you have something as streamlined as that, then you can also streamline a newsletter that's full of interesting information. And this comes down to what your natural talents are. So I love writing, so blogging is a no-brainer. So if I create a blog, I then take the outreach of that blog and tell my newsletter people about the fact that there's a blog there. So I'll create a bit of the blog, and then they go and they can read the blog. I also am very comfortable in front of a camera, so I create information things on YouTube. So now I've got subscribers on YouTube, and I use the YouTube films and also the blog to be able to add content that is rich and informative, that is going to make people want to open, depending on the tagline that I've put. They're going to want to open my newsletter every week to see what it is that they can learn that is an association with my book or my business or something else that is useful to them in their life. And the more you can create high value content of some kind for people, then and give away freebies, then the more people that are going to grow your mailing list. We've had I'm very lucky to be signed up by Hay House, and we've had Reed Tracy. He comes over and he does talks and answers questions to the Hay House authors about how we as authors can best promote our books. And one of the things that he said that really struck a chord with me was that roughly, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, so just bearing in mind I might be getting it slightly wrong, that 50,000 people on your mailing list is $1 million company, could be in $1 million company. So when you're thinking about it from the publisher's perspective, however many people you've got on your mailing list adds up in their mind to book sales. So if you've got X amount of people on your mailing list, then X amount of book sales is a percentage that could be drawn from that. But it's not only, obviously, building a mailing list, but also how many people you've got liking you on Facebook. Now, Facebook, it sounds crazy because what you're thinking is, I just want to create an amazing book that's going to change lives. Who cares who likes me on Facebook? But actually, again, when they're looking at Facebook stats and likes, they're looking at how many book sales, what your outreach is going to be. And there's ways on Facebook to be able to boost your audience. So if I take my mailing list numbers and I put it through Facebook, Facebook creates a like audience. So it will actually go and find profiles of other people that have similar interests to the profiles on Facebook of the people that are on my mailing list. So it finds via the email address the people on my mailing list, finds their page on Facebook, finds their interests, then builds a like audience. So if I want to then create a post that is targeted to that like audience, I already know that I'm, in a sense, sending out that information for, say, £10, £20, £100, however much you want to spend on boosting a post, to people who have an interest because they've already had an interest in other things that are similar. But it's better to build stuff on Facebook if you have limited time and you've got to build an audience and you're overwhelmed with social media platforms, because there's obviously Pinterest and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of that stuff. Statistics say that more books are sold via a Facebook following than via Twitter. So you really want to kind of find one thing that you can really put your attention into. Also, videos that you post up directly onto Facebook are going to do better than videos that you put up onto YouTube and then take the link and put that link onto Facebook. And that's because Facebook would dearly love to get into competition, as far as I understand it, dearly love to get into competition with YouTube and have their own video capacity so that people are actually sharing videos directly from Facebook. And what happens with Facebook is some of the videos are played directly in somebody's wall feed as well. So it means that as soon as that post comes up, the video starts playing. And if that video is promoting your book, then of course it might just catch the attention of someone who goes, oh, I'd like to read a book about that. So that's really, in essence, it's a painstaking, ball breaking thing to do is building all of that. They say the best thing to do is put on your page, on your Facebook page, is to put up 3 posts a day at differing times in order to build a substantial audience. My Facebook audience is about 3,000, and that's small. So I've got a lot of work to do on Facebook. But again, if you're a speaker, people look at Facebook and they can see, X amount of people, X amount of likes on Facebook equals X amount of bums on seats, equals X amount of sales of whatever. So it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. I'm not a fan of it particularly, but it's not that difficult if you've got great quality stuff to be able to kind of build that following, if you need to build that following in order to get your book published by a mainstream publisher. Obviously, another way of doing it is self-publish your book, get the book sales up. And I know authors who have done this where they've actually put a book up on Amazon, then discounted their first book just before the release of their second book. Their second book then comes out, and because they've given away, say, their first book for free, so the book's been out a while, they give it away for free. It then ranks as an Amazon bestseller, even though it's not being sold, it gets up the ranking. They then release their next book out at a discount. Amazon then send emails out to everybody saying, hey, this book's come out and you bought this other book and this is another book by the same author. People go, oh, I like the first book. I just started reading that. I'll buy the second book because it's at a discount. And then before you know it, you've suddenly got 2 bestsellers on Amazon. You take a screenshot of that, look, best-selling author suddenly. This, because the best-selling author is now not numbers of books, it's what Amazon thinks nowadays, which isn't always the amount of books that you would have had to have sold traditionally to become a best-selling author. And then you go to a publisher and say, hey, look, best-selling author, these books are selling really well. And it might be that a publisher decides to take on your current book if it thinks that they can take it further in mileage, or it might be that the second book that you create then goes through a traditional publisher. So that's another way round of being able to build a platform through book popularity, so that you can get that current book or another book kind of like out there. So that's another way of doing it. Helen, I'm going to ask you about that. Am I right in my theory that that's one way of doing it, or do you think that that's kind of a long way round?
No, I don't think it is a long way round, and actually that I always say it's a marathon and not a sprint. Well, it's not just me that says that. I think anybody that's involved in publishing and book promotion will always say it is a long game, and you need to think about it as a marathon. It's not just a quick flutter on Twitter. It's a long haul, and I would say that the first thing people need to do is think about who your readers are, where they are, and how you can reach them, and then make a plan for that. So an actual strategy. Write down all the things that you think that you can do. Do some scientific research. Building your mailing list is absolutely vital, because that's going to help you to be able to do active marketing rather than passive marketing, and that really comes in from a conversation that I had with an author at the end of last week, where he said, I have hundreds and hundreds of visitors to my blog, and I said, yes, but are you collecting their email addresses so that you can then actively market to them? And he said, no, I don't worry about that, because they all visit my blog. I said, yes, but you're relying very much on them visiting your blog, whereas if you have that the squeeze page, as it was then you can actively market to them. You can tell them when you've got a new book coming out. You can do interesting things like a cover reveal or a sneak preview of the opening chapter. So plan and have that strategy, and find out who your readers are. Are they all over the world? Are they based in the UK, or are they perhaps based overseas? Where are they, and how are you going to reach them? And then when you've got that plan and that strategy, and I would say that social media, you're absolutely right, Becky, Facebook and possibly Twitter, they're vital parts of your toolbox now, and you need to build working those into your life for the foreseeable future. It isn't a quick fix in mainstream publishing, and Jack might be able to correct me on this if I've got it wrong. But it's said that a mainstream will give a book 9 months to after 9 months. If it's being remaindered, then it's it's a sort of done deal. That book has passed. Whereas with self-publishing, you can get a much longer timeline, and people can still be promoting their book 5 years later, unless it's something that's very topical and obviously gone out of fashion. So just to go back to the social media, use it to be chatty and connect with those readers that you found out where they are, find out what they like, what do they like to talk about. And we have an author called Helen Hollick who spent most of the 90s as a Heinemann Random House author, and now she self-publishes with us. And she's an absolute master on Facebook. She because she actually talks to people, and people say, oh, Helen Hollick, best-selling novelist, has actually talked to me. She's answered my questions. She's telling me about her new book. So social media, there is the word social. Use it and to be sociable. You ignore that at your peril. So 80% of what you're talking about on social media must be helpful, friendly, sociable, not necessarily about your book. 20% of it, you can probably mention your book, but it should never be, buy my book, here's my book. It should always be, oh, I'm having this trouble with this character in my new book. So think about subtle ways of doing it, but make sure that the majority of what you're doing on social media is helpful and friendly. And then my one key thing that I can't stress enough is write more books. An author with one book to promote has almost restrained, has sort of constrained their own ability. Bring another book in and another book into the mix. And like you said, Becky, there are all these amazing strategies for giving away your first book, reducing the price of your first book, hooking people with that first book, and then once readers are loyal and they love you and they love your writing, they will want to read everything you write. So you've already got a dedicated audience. And some of our best performing authors are people like Helen Hollick, who has written, I think, 7 or 8 books that she's published with us. Then we've got Anna Belfrage, who's writing historical fiction, time slip novels, and she's just published book 8 and is working on a new series. And Harvey Black, who also is on book 7, I think. And it's the multiple book authors that seem to have more success, possibly also because they've got a lot of books out there, and there is a sort of wider reach for more books rather than just the one book.
Very, 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 very good stuff. And it's also very good to find out, when you were saying there, to find out where your readers are, just in case you fancy doing a book tour in somewhere fancy. So, nice idea. Anything that you'd like to add to that, Jack?
Well, of course, for a book tour, you need a physical book, because bookshops won't have you. If you've got a print-on-demand book, they simply won't have you. You need to have a conventionally printed book, a beautiful book that they can order in order for them to invite you in to do any sort of talks at their shops. And that's something that I think a lot of authors miss. They forget that in the mix and only find out too late that that's a factor. So if you think that that talking at WHS and the like is going to be something that you're going to be able to do or want to be able to do, then even if you self-publish, you need to make sure you have conventionally printed books in your hot little hands. But the thing that Helen was saying about the life of a book, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because as a trade published author, you need to create spikes in your sales, and you can do that in all sorts of ways. And you'll see, I've got my finger and I'm sort of running a line along. So if a book is a celebrity book, for instance, and it's around a TV show or something like that, then the spike has to go bang up before publication and stay up quite high and then come down. You'd naturally expect it to come down around the time that the show finishes. With non-fiction, the sales should rise probably more slowly, particularly if there's no media involved, and then they expect.
Oh, we've lost you a little bit. Jack, I don't quite know what's happened there. We've just got fuzzy white noise. Oh, are you back?
No, that was me just saying, yeah, I'm just getting fuzz as well. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. Jack, are you still there? We've lost Jack. Oh dear.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I was just scribbling down notes on the book Spikes as well, because that is really interesting to think about how
Can you hear me
different.
now?
Oh yes, you're back. Carry on. That was very interesting. Yeah. We can't lose you at that point. It's crucial.
No. So you can create your own spikes, and we should be doing that as well. And we should be watching. So whenever we do something, we should be looking closely at the sales to see whether what we did succeeds. So sometimes there's an argument for not doing too many promotional things altogether, because you need to know which one works. It's a bit like taking lots of vitamins or whatever. You know, you want to know which one actually did the job. So with any promo, give enough space so that you can monitor which ones are working, which ones aren't, which ones are directly affecting sales. I mean, weirdly and kind of controversially, there is an argument that goes that publicity doesn't necessarily sell books. And I know of people who spent a lot of money on publicity and they get an amazing amount of press, but it doesn't always translate into book sales. It's a funny old thing. You can't force people to buy the book. So it is worth mixing it up and not losing heart if you haven't got a fortune to spend on PR. The other thing, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but it's borrowing something from hip hop, really. And I'll say in advance, I'm a feminist, but you know the expression, someone being your bitch. Well, with a book, initially, I think lots of authors, when they first go into it, they want the book to be their bitch. They want the book to do an amazing job for them. They want to, if they're a non-fiction writer or an expert, they want it to boost their profile. If they want to set out to be a novelist, they want it to establish them as a novelist. But initially, you have to be your book's bitch. It's the other way around. You completely are a slave to that book and you make it work. You do everything for that book. And then at some point, you will see if you've got it right, if you're trying lots of things and you're plugging away, keeping on doing it, and it's a given that the writing is good, then it will tip into your favour and the book will start doing stuff for you and you'll start to see more of a return for that book, whether that's just in reputation, profile as a novelist, or you know, your expert status. But you know, initially you are working hard for that book. You are in its thrall rather than the other way around. And that's something that helps to keep your energy up if you know that it's normal to be in that state, rather than thinking, hey, I've done all this work, I've written this book, why isn't it doing something for me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about those spikes can be easily monitored via Amazon. So you can actually see on Amazon when you've got Author Central, and you can see how your book sales are actually doing. So you can see those kind of like peak points. And I know it's something that Dr. David Hamilton, he really watches those things. I get confused. I don't know what I'm looking at. But Dr. David Hamilton will go, oh, that worked, or this thing, you know. So he actually sold more books off a radio show with me on LBC than he'd sold at any other time, and before or since. So but he managed to find that out from looking at those spikes. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Really interesting. There's a couple of authors to mention. In fact, I mentioned them in my book, but off by heart, I can't remember them now. I'm sorry. I can always email you them if you want to include it with the recording, Becky. But Rachel Abbott is a good one to watch. She's a self-published author, but she has an agent, which is really interesting, a very conventional agent called Lizzie Kramer, who represents a lot of big authors. And Lizzie took her on because she knows that Rachel absolutely does the business with marketing her books. She spends half the year writing and half the year marketing her books. And interestingly too, a lot of the people who are really successful in self-publishing are ex-IT or marketing people. So they are skills to develop.
Absolutely. It's like you just have to be able to have so many different skills, but it's worth trying. Christina has asked, she's saying, What do I need to keep in mind when I'm writing is not when if what I'm writing is not necessarily in line with the field that I've actually been building a platform on. So what she's saying is that she's been writing a memoir, but her platform is as a life coach. Do I need to build a platform with my name or as a writer and not as a coach? So who wants to
I
dive
think
in
you
on
can
that one?
find links. I think you can. I think there will be a common thread, and I think if you sit down, Christine, and you write about why you wrote the book, I think you'll find something in it. You'll find a thread. You'll find a way to make that crossover between the two things. Otherwise, you're schizophrenic. I'm really kidding. But no, there will be a link. I'll eat my hat and anything else you want me to eat if there is not a link between it. If there's not a soft sort of crossover you can make. And as a coach, it's a gift because, of course, perhaps you overcome your fears to write the book, or whatever it is, there'll be something in your story. So if you write your story and the story of why you wrote the book, which is, again, an absolute gem for publicity, your backstory, we call it. So all of the stuff about why I wrote the book, how the idea came to me, that's all the stuff that publicists love and that the media loves. It's the stuff that's absolute gem on social media, and I think it's where you'll find what that link is between the two. So I don't think you have to go out and do that. So for instance, one author of mine is John Perkis, who you know, Becky.
I do.
And he is he's a recruitment executive, but he wrote, his first book was called Brand You, and then the fifth book he's now writing is about it's changed the name so many times, it's still in development, but it's essentially about finding purpose in life.
Is it
And
still
he was
about
talking to me about
going the flow down the river or something or another, wasn't it? It was about going down the.
It's kind of slightly moved on from that, but he just posted, I just saw today, just posted on Facebook saying, thanks, Jack. Yeah, I've decided that what I'm going to start doing is not talking about separate pages for all of my books. It's going to be about me. And sometimes it's about stepping into that space more, stepping into, well, here I am and I do all these different things, and the link is me rather than the subject.
Absolutely. And also, Christina, I mean, I went from obviously being known as a self-help writer and then decided to release a erotic fiction book. But the two things did need to be separate because obviously my readership, who are buying books that are self-help book, are suddenly going to kind of come across a fiction book that is a completely different genre. Now that kind of jars. So that's why I put the second one under the name Rebecca Stone. But I actually used my Becky Walsh profile and following to get the initial sales of a Rebecca Stone book. And so how I did that was by sort of having some mysticism around who had written that book, and then eventually revealed the fact that that book had actually been written by me. So I actually used that in my advantage. And I think you can, just because you're writing a book about one thing, it really doesn't matter because it's all you at the end of the day. And I completely agree with Jack, is that there's going to be crossovers. There's going to be things that connect the reader. And sometimes people love backstories, and certainly if you ever go and listen to any public speakers, they always talk about, I was bankrupt, I was broke, I was living in a car, all of these different things that had happened to me before they actually get to the message or the point that is actually useful to the audience. They always have to caveat, this is where I started, and this was my breakthrough moment, and this is why I am qualified to tell you about what you can do with your life. So actually those backstories are really important. I know I don't use mine. I should, but I don't. So I always find it really
And do you know
awkward.
what? But the other benefit of doing that is that if you are slightly having trouble accessing your voice, and people talk about voice all the time in writing, and it's important for fiction and non-fiction, if you're having trouble finding that, or it's not quite ringing true, going back and working on your backstory, it's amazing what dividends that pays. It really puts you in the place, I'm sounding like a complete hippie now, but really puts you in the place of where the idea is coming from. So not only for external purposes, but for internal purposes, and for the quality of your writing and that indescribable voice that people talk about. Knowing your backstory, knowing why you write it, being really honest about that, and thinking about it consciously really helps you produce better work.
And also, I think people forget that press releases aren't normally about your book. So press releases are actually about you and anything that the press are going to be able to get a hook in about your book. So I shamelessly used the fact that I shared a flat with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in order to promote, well, anything, because obviously the press are interested in these big celebrity names, and the fact that you, that's my dog barking, Cash, that's enough. That the fact that that you shared a flat with them and how that influenced your book or didn't influence your book or got you where you are today, because people, celebrities or people that or experiences that you've had sell books. So that kind of, it sells books, but it also sells their newspapers or magazines or whatever it is that, it creates a feature. And it also means that those particular things are search engine stuff that people are looking for information about things that people already know about. This is why you end up with films like Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man 5, Spider-Man Recontinued, The Son of Spider-Man, because, like musicals that have come from films or books, or we're constantly regurgitating things because it already has a following. And if it already has a following, then it already has an interest, then it already has a market, which is unfortunate if you want to create anything new. But this is why, books like 50 Shades of Grey actually had a blog following before it actually got turned into, an erotic fiction book in itself. And she'd actually caveated that off the back of the Twilight series and the Twilight films. So she'd taken characters from Twilight. So you can see how these things, all of that, the more you can put into that, the more you can make links like that, then with your backstory or anything like that, then the more you're going to get the attention of the media when actually your book's ready for launching. So, go on, sorry.
I was just before we finish that, there's one very, very practical point as well, and that is not wanting to diffuse your message, because if you do divide up your sort of personas into life coach and memoirist author, then you're going to need different websites and different you need to invest different time into those two different profiles. And I would say that actually, like you have, Becky, you've combined them both. Yes, they are separate profiles, but your message isn't being diffused into two different sort of ways of speaking to two different audiences. You're using both with that crossover, because like we said when we were talking about book promotion, it's very time consuming, and you do need to build it into the rest of your life, really, for the foreseeable future while you're promoting your book. And if you're trying to do that in two different areas, then that's going to be quite a challenge.
Yeah, that is a challenge. Even having two names for me is a bit of a challenge. Two Twitter accounts, good grief. So Kerry asked a question about endorsements, and she was saying, that she's looking to self-publish a book, and she's wondering when she should be sending out for potential endorsements, now or when the book is actually released.
She should ask people now and then tell them when she should be sending material, so she's priming them. I don't know if you know Shah Wasmond, who wrote a book called Just Do It or something like that.
Yes, I do.
Something similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
She has had a great piece of advice about low-hanging fruit. And what she said was, if you ask, your hairdresser's mum for an endorsement of some sort, you can usually build your way up. So say, for instance, you wanted an endorsement from Charles Worthington. He's a top hairdresser, isn't he? So you perhaps ask your local hairdresser first, or a reasonably well-known hairdresser, and then you would work your way up to asking for a better endorsement by then writing to the more senior hairdresser to say, well, this lovely hairdresser here, who's fantastic, has given me an endorsement. I really appreciate it. He's great. He's the best in his field, and I know that you're even more experienced. It'd be lovely for you, to have your name in the book. That's the approach that you take if you don't know the person you're asking an endorsement from. But it's also a good way if you ask people first, the ones that they're the low-hanging fruit, and then work your way up from there. So get those on board first, and then work your way up to the bigger names that you want, because it really is only worth putting very good, well-known names on a book, or people at the top of their field if it's an expert book.
And I also think it's important that you explain why this book matters as well. Quite often people will ask me to endorse their book, but they don't kind of personalize it to I really want you to read this book because I've looked at your work and I feel that this, why do you want me to endorse it? So sometimes people say, oh, could you endorse my book? I'll send it to you. Well, I don't really have the time to read your entire book to find out why I will be interested in it. So just spell it out to me. Just say, this is why you're going to love this book, and I really want your endorsement on it. And, I actually feel that, your audience will love this book as well because, anyone who likes you will also like this. So if you personalize it as well, because it's, when you're busy and you do get quite a lot of requests, and reading a book is time consuming, and some people won't actually read your book and they'll endorse it. They may copy somebody else's endorsement or get you to write the endorsement for them, believe it or not. But I think if you can actually get somebody who's actually really read your book, even if they've skim read it and decided to endorse it, then that's good. So you need to give them the time to have read it too. Some people just want a couple of chapters, some people want the entire book, but you really need to pitch it personally so that it's not just well, you're a big name and I've written a book on fly fishing, so could you stick your name on it, please? That stuff's quite important to the person that you're pitching to. You are making a pitch and you want the person to be interested in what it is that you're asking them to do. Anything you'd add to that, Helen?
I completely agree with what you just said, and I think that is a mark of a professional author, one that recognises that people's time is precious, other professionals' time is precious, and you're presenting the sort of what's in it for me factor, because of course everybody is really thinking, okay, what is in this for me? And you mentioned that you would say to somebody, your readers are really going to like this. So yeah, approach it as a professional. But again, I'm just going to go back to practicalities. I'm being Mrs. Practical tonight, which is most unlike me. I'm just going to say to Kerry that the time that you want to get an endorsement is at fairly early stage. As soon as your manuscript is in its sort of, you've got a base, second or third draft. Maybe it's not publication ready, but it's good enough to be seen by other professionals. That's the time to get your endorsement. If you wait until after you've published the book and it's out there, then as a self-published author, and you're going to be responsible for all the costs, you're going to have to then go back to the cover designer or the company that helped you do the book and say, I need the cover artwork changed because I've got this endorsement to put on the cover now. And they will say, yes, okay, and now you're going to have to get it printed again or re-uploaded if it's a print-on-demand book. So I would say endorsements need to come early because they're going to be an integral part of your cover design, and that's the other thing. The cover designer needs to allocate some space for that fantastic endorsement and that famous name on the cover of your book. And then the things that you're going to get later after the book is out there, they're going to be the reviews, and they are equally important, but they won't necessarily go on the cover of your book. They're going to follow your book around because your publishing company, or you, if it's you bought your own ISBNs, are going to make sure that all that information is fed into Nielsen Book Data. And Nielsen Book Data is the organisation that will be sending information out about your book to wholesalers and retailers. And you can have a whole string of fantastic reviews following your book around. And that can happen later. But the key thing is to get the endorsement, that endorsement that you really want on the cover needs to come in early. So that's from a practical perspective.
And people are extraordinarily kind. I wrote a book called Haunted West End Theatres, and I heard on the radio that Judi Dench had seen a ghost, and I was collecting stories about theatre ghosts from all over the West End. And so I wrote to her, and she said, yeah, great. She wrote me a letter back with her ghost story in it. We actually heard from John Hurt as well, and he wrote back and said, haven't seen any ghosts, wished I had.
That's lovely. That's lovely.
Yeah, really, really kind, especially old school actors. That some of the new ones, because now we're in a world of sort of Twitter and social media, and they're constantly being bombarded by, people retweet this, connect with that, and that they're more accessible now than they used to be. But certainly a lot of the old school actors are just lovely, lovely human beings who are creatives themselves, who want you to do well, who want to support other people who are putting out creative endeavours. So never think I'm being a nuisance. all you can get is somebody who says no, and no's okay. No isn't a rejection of you. It's just that no can come from a place of overwhelm. So just absolutely just stick it out there. And, I'd agree, go with the lowest hanging fruit first so that they can read the review rather than reading the book saying, oh, this person said that, so I should actually read this book. It kind of inspires them to read the book. So I think that's a really good thing. We got another question in from Elaine, and she has said, when's the best time to approach a publisher? When the book is finished or nearly finished?
It depends whether you're talking about fiction or non-fiction. With fiction, you must absolutely have the novel finished and have a minimum of 3 or 4 drafts. An experienced agent or publisher can spot a first draft at 100 yards away. With the first draft, you can see that what the author intended, but it doesn't come through. And so similarly, when you're reading your first draft, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for where you can see what your intention was, but you haven't quite got up to the mark. And that's everybody. Without fail, nobody produces a first draft. And actually, I've heard of it once, but 99.9% of the rest of us can't produce a first draft that's marketable. With non-fiction, you produce a really good proposal, a proposal that explains what your ideas are for marketing the book, why you wrote the book, 3 chapters, 3 sample chapters, and an outline of all the other chapters that will appear in the book. So yeah,
that sounds pretty good. And I've got one other question from her as well, which is, what is the market like for non-fiction books? Well, I kind of answered that a little bit myself, which is, it depends which market, because of course your book can be published in the States, it could be published in the UK, it could be published in Australia. So it depends which market. Actually, I believe that the UK doesn't go as well for non-fiction books as perhaps the US does. And so it really depends whether or not there's a need for the book, and it's just trying to find out that need. Was that from you, Jax? I could feel the jumping in. Go on.
Yeah. It's such a shame because we don't really have a speaking circuit here in the same way that they do in the States. There isn't really a sense of a circuit at all, and the speaking agencies tend to represent people who are already well known, but for anybody else, they won't really actively go out and seek speaking opportunities. There isn't a sort of a route around the country that you can just travel and speak. That might be about to change. I'm about to have an interesting meeting with somebody on that point, because we really do need something here in the UK.
We really, really do. And there actually isn't anything for sort of non-fiction speakers. I mean, for, Mind, Body, Spirit, the biggest one is probably Mind, Body, Spirit Festival, which is on in May in London, and they're doing another version of that in Birmingham. And then, there are speaking agents. I'm with Specialist Speakers as a speaking agent.
Are you?
Yes, I am. Yes, we'll have another chat about that. And so, but I just think, we tend to be in a culture in the UK of pull your bootstraps up and just get on with it, will you? We're not quite as sort of into self-work and self-realization as much as they are in other countries. And again, just to kind of mention something that Reed Tracy said at a meeting, he actually said out of all of the, Hay House, Australia, America, India, it actually seems to be, if I got what he was saying right, it's actually a little bit tougher in the UK for non-fiction authors. However, you're not in a goldfish bowl. There's a whole world out there. And just because it may be difficult to kind of get those speaking gigs, and, I have a whinge about this as well, because I actually think it's harder for women, because the Mind, Body, Spirit audience is predominantly female. And for some other reason in this country, we just don't seem to get behind other women in the same kind of sisterhood as they've got in the US. But don't get me started on that. So I think it's really, really a lot of it is just don't limit yourself into thinking about this UK market. And I know, Elaine, we were talking before that it's kind of like a memoir. So yours is probably going to be a UK market. But for my book, You Do Know, we made sure that it had a mid-Atlantic voice. So the way that it was written was mid-Atlantic, and it had American spelling. So it really, really, it just depends on how passionate you are about really kind of connecting with the British market. So it's it is a tough one, that as a market for non-fiction. I just think if your book is answering a problem, especially something that is of our time. I mean, I often think to project yourself when you're writing a book is whatever it is that you're passionate about. Think about where we are now today with that being a problem, and then project yourself 2 years into the future. Where are we going? So I did this with my book, You Do Know, and I also did it with Intuitive Lovers, which is I thought, okay, so Intuitive Lovers was created from seeing my one-to-one clients who were having relationship difficulties, especially women. We'd come through the generation of the women's liberation movement, which a little bit was a liberation into the masculine rather than a powerful feminine. And lots of very powerful, independent, strong women were finding it very hard to meet a guy that was as equally strong in his own right. So I decided to create Intuitive Lovers to somewhat answer some of that question. So what I did was I thought, okay, so if this is where I'm hearing this being repeated as a problem, what is that problem going to have metastasized into in 2 years' time? Because in 2 years' time, if I'm going down a traditional publishing route, it can take about 2 years before your book actually gets published, even after you've finished it. So when you project yourself into the future like that, I also did the same with You Do Know, which I was thinking a lot of the time we're in a space of overwhelm where we've got so much information now online, more than we've ever had information before. It used to be that the person with the information got paid the big bucks, the lawyers, the doctors. I can now go to the doctor and probably know more about my condition because I've looked at it up online than the poor doctor who has to know a lot of things about a million different conditions. So no longer is the person with the information in the power dynamic. So I thought we're getting more and more ambivalent and overwhelmed. And the jam jar theory of, if you've got, 60 jars of jam sales go down. If you've got 3 jars of jam sales go up. So I decided if I was to write a book that was going to be powerful in between 2 and 5 years' time, what would it need to say to an audience of people overwhelmed, an audience of people with too much information, an audience of people who can't see the wood for the trees? So that's why I wrote a book about, intuition, apart from the fact that it's my favourite subject, intuition, saying you do know, to bring the power back to the individual. So whenever you're thinking about a self-help book, think about in the future, what is this going to address? Make it a book that is projecting and solving a problem that is coming rather than a problem that is current. Because most authors will be answering a problem that is current because it stares everybody in the face. By the time your book comes out, you want it to be pioneering an idea. And also there's another thought behind this too, which is, do the books create the world or does the world create the books? So at the end of Intuitive Lovers, I kind of made a wish of how I wish relationships were, not necessarily how they are, but I imagined if there was a shift of consciousness, how relationships would change. And I wrote about that and depicted that as if it was a reality in the book. And the reason why I did that was to create that being a reality in the future. So it might just become a reality in 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people who read that book, but it's creating the world rather than the book reflecting upon the world, because it's allowing your book to create a shift of consciousness. So whether or not there's a market for a non-fiction book, it's really to look into the future and say, how can you not write it if you believe that you've got a solution to a problem? How can you not serve that? How can you not answer that? If you can see, if you have an insight, how can you not write the book? You're obliged to. If the muse decided to give the solution to the entire planet's problems to you, you best get on with it. So, any other thoughts from you guys about that? You're both being polite not to talk over each other. Helen, I'll start with you. Sorry, Helen.
You've covered everything. I mean, how on earth can I follow that anyway? Yeah. No, I don't think I've got anything to add.
Well, we're kind of nearly at time. So, is there anything that you ladies are burning to say that you feel is an important piece of information? Maybe nothing that's been asked tonight, but something that if you could kind of like leave us with a big nugget of information or a small one, what would it be? So, I'll start with you, Helen, because we were just speaking.
Oh gosh.
Sorry, that was
Oh,
rude of me. Just here, have this. No warning.
what would my big nugget of information be? Okay, for self-published authors, I would say the biggest thing that you need to have is, apart from professionalism, which I mentioned before, is self-confidence and self-belief. Because self-publishing is definitely not an easy route to market, and you will enjoy great successes, but you will also meet people who can be a little bit sneery towards you. Oh, you've self-published, that must mean your book's not really that good, because if it was, you would have had a mainstream publisher. And those people don't really understand that the landscape has changed so significantly that many big name authors are choosing to self-publish. So you need to be self-confident and think, well, that's actually quite an old-fashioned attitude. I don't believe that. And you always have belief in yourself and your book, and remember that you're doing it for your readers and also for yourself, but for your readers. So focus on the really fantastic reviews that your readers leave you. Those reviews that maybe are not as glowing as you'd want them to be, never try and respond to them, never bite back, never say you're wrong, ignore and move on and maintain that self-confidence, because you've done an amazing thing. You've written a whole book. You've not only been one of those people at the dinner party that always nobble me and say, do you know, I've always wanted to write a book. You've actually done it. So keep that self-confidence, hold it close, and when things knock you, just pick yourself up and get back in there.
Brilliant advice. Absolutely brilliant. Jack, any last words? Can you hear us? Jack, are you there? I think we've lost Jack again temporarily. I will wait. She will come back. I'm convinced of it. I can feel it in my waters. I just want to tell you about something that I am launching off the back of this webinar. What I decided to do is create an online course for people that want to publish a book, because I just found it overwhelming. When I didn't know whether or not to self-publish, to publish. I didn't know what the through line was. So I decided to create a course, but not just of me, because that would be quite boring. But actually, I created an online course full of a whole load of really amazing people. So let me tell you who the course contributors are. So it's a 5-week course, and it really takes you from wherever you are in your publishing journey to actually knowing and having the background, so that you have all the information available to you to work out whether or not, indie publishing, doing it yourself is the way to go, whether or not to have somebody who can help you publish a book like Silverwood, whether or not to go to a traditional publisher, all of those things. So the course contributors: Helen Hart, who we've been speaking to, Nick Williams, who's a best-selling author, Sandy Newbeginning, who's also an Amazon best-selling author and a writer's coach, Liz Dean, who's a freelance editor, writer, ghostwriter, and she's done loads of stuff with different UK publishers, Laura Lee Clark, who's a business coach, and she's going to talk about, she talks on the course about how to create a business around the book that you are bringing out into the world. Rachel Medhurst, who's an indie author, she did it all by herself. She learned every single stitch and niche and bolt and typesetting, and she's going to explain to you how she did that. Jack Burns, obviously, the wonderful Jack Burns, we've been just speaking to, and hopefully she's there somewhere in the background. Rebecca Beattie, who's an author, editor and proofreader, Derek Thompson, who's an editor and ghostwriter, Andrea Gardner, who you might know if you saw that film that went viral of the blind man and someone comes over and changes his sign, and he then gets lots of money because he's begging on the street in Scotland. She came up with that fantastic viral video, and she's talking about how to really communicate in your book pitch, and how to kind of get your message out. Sandy Draper, who is my editor, she's a fantastic editor and writer, and she also edits for Hay House. aspects of the 5-part multimedia online course, which is the best publishing direction for you personally, how to get your book ready for publication, including working with editors, book cover and titles, how to write a convincing book proposal, how to get a literary agent, understanding self-publishing, trade publishing, professional publishing for the self-funded author, how to make money from your book and how not to let it cost you a fortune, understanding contracts, how to handle rejections, and how to find a literary agent. So, that's mentioned twice. That's really lapse of me. It was obviously so important, I had to say it twice. So that's a 5-part multimedia online course. It's £99. If you sign up for it in the next 24 hours, which is by 8:30 tomorrow, I'm going to chuck in half an hour's worth of coaching as well. If you were on another webinar with me before, I also have another course which is called How to Get Clear on Your Book Idea. So if you're not clear on your book idea, that helps you formulate your book idea. But obviously this webinar and this course is for people who are a little bit further down the line. So if you want to take advantage and get that 30 minutes free, that'd be good. We've recorded this webinar so you can listen to it again. I'm going to kind of like back it up, pop it up onto YouTube, and then everyone who's signed up for this will get the availability to be able to listen to this again. Jack, are you with us? Are you there?
Yes, bit of a fright there, but yes, I'm here. I'm back.
Are you all right? My dog's been nagging me for something from the kitchen. She's finally gone to sleep. Now we've come to the end. I've been doing sign language of no, whatever it is that you want, stop it. And luckily she didn't need a tiddle, so that's the main thing. But she's been scratching the food cupboard. I'm like, stop it.
She tells you when it's over. She's got to watch your dog, I think, by the sound of it.
Well, she knows when the day's over, that's for sure. So any last thoughts or insights from you before we leave all of these wonderful people for being on the webinar in pieces?
I think really it's the thing of treating writing and publishing very separately. So, you do need to think about how you're going to publish a book and etc. But do be aware that that's a very separate process, and so don't let it stress you when you're trying to write. When you're just trying to be creative and come up with your idea and improve it, and work on your characters or work on your chapter outline or whatever it is. Just don't let them sort of overtake each other. Treat them very, very separately. If anybody would like to come along to London Writers Club and meet some agents and just get a feel for whether they think they will self-publish or trade publish or what's involved in the whole process, then feel free to email me and I'll put you on the guest list if you tell me that you're on this this seminar. And I guess the other thing is if you go through this course with Becky and you are ready to have your book proposal assessed by 2 literary agents, we're running a book proposal writing course later in June. There's a non-fiction one and a fiction one, and that's a whole day on just with a literary agent's eye, just saying what's right and what's wrong with your proposal and helping you turn no's into yeses, really. So LondonWritersClub.com is the website if anyone's interested there. But I just want to wish everyone luck, really. I mean, it's a big undertaking. We're all a bit crazy, really. I don't know why we write, really. We write because we've got lots to say. And the thing is to do ourselves justice, to get it out there and with the best intentions and with the best work we can do on our books. And just good luck, everybody, really. And thanks for listening this evening. Thank you for inviting me, Becky, and lovely to meet you, Helen.
Yeah, I'd second all that. Definitely good luck, and thanks for having me too, Becky. And it's really nice to kind of virtually meet all those names of the people that are on that list. And if anybody would like to chat with me about self-publishing or working with Silverwood Books, then I'd love to hear from you. Our website is silverwoodbooks.co.uk, and there's lots of free information on there in the learning zone if you've got thoughts about book cover design or how to write a back cover blurb, things like that. And I'd love to hear from anybody.
No problem. And thank you. And Kerry has said thank you. Jules has said thank you. Geraldine said thank you. So thank you for all your thank yous. We really appreciate, and thank you for your questions as well. On the course, I've just sent you a link to the course. Where it says introduction and preview, there is a free ebook. So go and download that because it's got everyone that you've spoken to tonight, all of the contributors, all of their contact details and information about them is all in this ebook, and there's lots of juicy stuff in there as well. So even if you don't sign up for the course, go and nab it. So then you've got all of those fantastic, editor contacts, people to get in touch with, as you go through your book journey, so that you're fully supported with people that are good, and you can hang your hat on, and that are recommended. So that's a brilliant thing. Thank you so much, Helen and Jeff. Thank you so much for being on the call. I'm really grateful. Both of you have helped me in my career as an author in your own rights, and I'm just delighted that I've managed to take your brains and and put your views and thoughts out to an audience of budding people that maybe one day they'll be holding their own webinar about their story, about how they made their book dream come true. And I really hope that that's the case. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and hope you get to sign up to the course. I'd love to help you further. But if not, you've got 3 different wonderful directions now on being able to make that book dream come true. So thank you ever so much for joining us. You take care. Bye for now.